What's up guys? So in this video I'm going to be breaking down another dark textured psychedelic sample, but this time we're doing something different. Most music that we listen to is in a 4/4 time signature, which means you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. But this is in 6/8, which means it's a swung rhythm. So instead you would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's a different rhythm. Anyway, I'm excited to break this down and just show you how this ended up sounding quite different, because I wanted to challenge myself and compose in a time signature I just don't normally compose in. I'm normally working in 4/4 and it's probably going to be in minor. So I want to push myself now, and hopefully this is going to inspire you to do the same, to compose tracks in different time signatures. I mean, I might start messing around with tracks that are in 7/4 or 7/8, 5/4. You know, you can look into time signatures, odd time signatures. There's a lot of opportunity for cool, new experimental rhythms. And I also want to compose more tracks in different keys, and to be honest, even just a major key, or working in the modes like Lydian or Mixolydian or Phrygian, all the different modes which you can look into as well. But anyway, all this to say, be experimental, don't put yourself into a box, and create things that you haven't before. You'll improve and become more skilled as a producer. So anyway, if you don't know me, my name's Blue. I'm a producer, sample maker. I've been doing this for many years, making thousands of sounds, loads of sound kits, which, by the way, if you want free premium sounds, full compositions with stems or phrases and accents that you can use in your own projects, you can click the link below in the description. They're completely for free. And lastly, if you'd like to work with me one-on-one, where we take where you're at right now in your music production and where you're trying to get to, and I will help you get there faster. If you're interested in that, you can book a free half-an-hour call with me where we can discuss where your music production's at and where you're trying to get to. Now, this sample or track is 5 sections. We've got an intro, a chorus, then a long verse, a bridge, and an outro. So this is what the intro sounds like. So short and sweet. I started with the piano, so it was just this simple pattern that I played. So peep that little like rhythmic like bass note at the end there. This is just a super simple pattern that I just played in on the MIDI keyboard as I was just like jamming around, and getting those low root notes on a piano and like a lower octave is always usually going to help give you that dark tone, especially if it's in a minor key. So that's something you can instantly apply to your samples if you're trying to create something like dark and ominous. And so I bounced that out, and then I just sound shifted it up 3 semitones, and it sounded like this. Got quite a few textures here, mostly from my guy Joe Made. I love his sound kits. He's incredible. Like, he makes some awesome sounds. So starting with his, which I took some of his sounds and I basically just chopped them up, reversed, muted some parts, and so the first layer is just this. So just a cool kind of like scratchy, eerie sound, and that's just washed out with a bunch of reverb delay. If I just drag it out here so you can see what it originally kind of sounded like. Obviously I've stretched it, but without any processing. So really cool, unique sound. But yeah, once you add the processing, or, you know, I've even got distortion, just a bunch of delay, reverb, some halftime, we get this. Super cool, eerie sounding. And then we got this texture, which I didn't do too much to. I just EQ'd out a lot of lows, highs, basically, and just sounds like this. So it just really gives it a cool kind of rhythm. And the way I actually got that was I took this original just like sound or sample from him, and I basically chopped it up into like 3 different tracks, and the 3 different tracks just have different pitches, and that's just from sound shifting them. So I've created a bit of a melody by using different tracks. So I've taken one melody or like texture, and then I've put it onto 2 other tracks that have different pitches assigned to them. So then I was able to create like a bit of a melody, and I mean, it's quite rhythmic as well, but then I got this. I just found that some of those snippets sounded better in different notes or keys. So yeah, that's what I did. And then I just bounced them out. And then that's how we got. So super cool glitchy texture. I've got the RC20 kind of cranked up, and it's got that noise, so you're getting that like vinyl-y crackle sound. It's just, yeah, really, really nice texture. Now I've got this swell just at the end. So I was messing around with this other texture, but I didn't really like most of it, so I ended up just using like the tail end of it, reversing it with that fade, and then that's how I created the swell, which just helps build a bit of anticipation before that next section. Then I've got this harp kind of texture layer, which I got from Splice. I did a bunch of chopping, used halftime, a bunch of reverb, delay, saturation. There's actually quite a lot of delay on this. I've got the stock Logic delay, I've got the Galaxy tape echo, and then I've EQ'd some of the lows out, so it sounds like this. And without any of the processing, it sounds like this. Pretty different. So recently I was working with a student, and I was mentioning the importance of being able to be a producer and take a sound and flip it into something completely new. Of course, you can sample and take sounds from other places and just use them as they are, but I think a lot of the fun and creativity and just novelty as a music producer comes from being able to take sounds and flip them in a completely new way to make them sound different and blend into something new. So again, compared to. So it just gave it a lot more grit. That I think worked really well with these other layers. Really gives this sample like a darker tone. And then I've got these kind of like percussive hits, but they're also melodic, and they're melodic because I've done the same thing and taken the one sample and then put it onto another track or tracks where I've got a different tuning or like pitch to them. So I'll actually unmute these ones just so you can hear them like in better context. But yeah, they just sounded like this. So they're 2 different like little kind of like hits, but I just like the kind of back and forth of going between the E, because the sample or track is in E minor, but then the B, which is like a perfect fifth. If you're in like a minor key, for example, if you go 5 notes down, it pretty much always works with the sound. So they just complement, because 5 notes down is the dominant, so it pretty much just always works really well. So using the E and then the B here, going back and forth, it just has this nice tonality to it. And with a couple of these lower tracks, I've just got the Galaxy tape echo, just a delay. So you're getting this kind of back and forth like difference. And so I basically bounce these first and third ones out and just combine them into one. And then I just added a bunch of reverb, delay again, and even a bit of portal just on the default setting, which kind of gave it this like shakiness. It's kind of like melodic, but it also acts as percussion. And speaking of percussion, this is where you get like this foundational like 6/8 rhythm happening. So again, 6/8 just meaning out of 8, like you're counting 6. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I take off the processing, it just sounds like this. That's really quiet, so I'll make it a bit louder as I tucked it in the background. And then with processing, so yeah, this layer is literally just sat and tucked all the way in the background, but it just helps keep that rhythm there, but it's just really subtle. And that's because in this next section now, this is where the drums come in. So and I just love that 6/8 swung feel, because it kind of instantly gives you this like romantic feeling. You know, it's the kind of rhythm that you'd often like have a ballad or like a ballroom dance to. Like it just has that kind of romantic feeling to it. And I think combining that with the darker textures, it's just such a nice combination. Now there's really like two main layers that I think just adds so much to this section. So we've got the piano repeating, we've got the kind of weird like harp texture. I mean, it doesn't sound like a harp after all the processing. That's what we wanted. And then we've got the same percussion, the one sat in the back. But we'll start with the drums. So the drums were from Splice. Now, without any processing and just being time stretched, they sounded like this. And then with all the processing, where I just pitched it down one, added a little bit of halftime, some of this tape effect, which I just love, a little bit of a flanger. And a flanger is often, I think, when you're trying to get a kind of psychedelic sound or sonic, a flanger is a really great option, because it just gives you this like jet plane, like whooshy effect. And also here it cranks up the width, so it just gives it a very spacey feeling. And then I've done quite drastic like boosts, especially on this, because the drums are just very kind of like muffled and I feel like subdued. So I had to kind of really try like boosts, you know, where the snare often sits around that like 1 to 2K mark, and then just boosting that kick drum as well, and then just adding compression, and then we get this. So because of the halftime, it continues here, because the halftime is forcing it in these slower sounding rhythms. But because I haven't used 100% of a wet mix, and I've excluded the lower end up to like 2.6K hertz, it's not affecting the low end. So you still have the rhythm. You know, if I cranked up this halftime, it would sound like this. That's where I exclude. So it's not affecting the low end, and then I've also brought the mix down just to make it a bit more subtle. The halftime's still giving it this kind of like body and low end, and then you can hear that flanger making it sound spacey and wide and kind of whooshy and stuff. So definitely adding to that psychedelic effect. And because the snare wasn't quite hitting as much as I wanted it to through the mix, I just added a separate snare. These are the exact same snare sounds, but all I did was just stretch a couple of them and move them slightly off the grid to be imperfect. And I've just done a lot of similar processing. Without anything, it just sounds like this. So a very dry snare, but yeah, adding flanger, some reverb, delay, we get this. I think that just complemented these, so I'll also add the background, like rhythm. It sounds like a weird like psychedelic gunshot that just sits really nicely in the background. So, and then speaking of drums, we actually end on this drum fill, which I'm embarrassed to say how much time I actually spent on this, and I ended up just opting for the simple drum fill instead of the complicated one I was trying to go for. So they just sound like this, two different like chops that I've taken from full drum fills. They sound like this. So it's literally just boom, boom. And just with all that reverb and a little bit of like the flanger effect again, it just has so much body, and it transitions nicely to that next section. And it's really subtle, but there's this like little bass snippet down here, which I'm gonna show you in like 2 sections. And it's just, so really, really subtle. You probably don't notice it too much, but it just accented really nicely. But again, it's really, really subtle. And so the 2 last layers in this section, and this is like my favorite one, taken from Splice, but without any processing, it sounded like this. So I have chopped it, I've stretched it a little bit, but then with all the processing, God, it gives me like almost this Nordic, like folk kind of feeling, and it's dreamy sounding, and it's dreamy sounding because this plugin, which I've spoken about before, but it's a free plugin, Magic Switch by Baby Audio, and it's basically a chorus plugin. It makes it sound wider and kind of also psychedelic and just spacey, and it just complemented really nicely. And then I've got these keys, which I actually forgot to show you in the intro, but they, no pun intended, came from Sky Keys, which is an amazing VST. I barely did any processing to it, and it just sounded like this. So it just sits nicely in the background. It's not super noticeable, but it just gives it this bit of like tension and texture. I should also mention that actually I have this layer that plays throughout, and it's from Prod by Evil, and it just sits really nicely. All I've done is just sound shifted it up a little bit and just EQ'd out a lot of the lows, so it just sits in the high end nicely tucked away and with a little bit of panning. So that's definitely giving this sample a lot of ambience. And I always say this, but just using ambiences like that, vinyl crackle, tape recorders, any like people talking in the background, anything like that just adds a lot of depth and realism to your track. So moving into the verse section now, we've got definitely like a bit more of a switch up and like some new sounds. So I just love that little transition bit at the end, but yeah, we've got the same strings continuing. So beautiful. The same textures, the glitchy ones from earlier. We've got that like melodic kind of like snare hit happening. Now I did accent the drums here with like a little like soft crash, and I've EQ'd out a lot of the lows and added delay on this just to give it a little bit more impact when it comes in. And the next little like nice percussive ear candy that I added with these like kind of shell sounds. And these came from 2 sounds that I combined together. It was like a gunshot, like bullets falling, I guess, from a gun. And then this. And that's just got delay on it, so that's why it's carrying over. Otherwise, it's just literally just adding delay. And I just sound shifted those like gun shell sounds, and I just bounced them together and then just added a bunch more delay and got this. I also emphasized that with this other impact. So it's also got that triplet kind of rhythm, so it suits the project. But again, just a subtle accent. And the only new layer here in this first half of the verse is this like harpsichord that I reversed. It's also very subtle and could and couldn't be there, like, but it just sounded like this. It was this like pianissimo preset in Diva, and it just sounded like this. So it's this section kind of like, I feel like puts you in a bit of a trance, and that just came from me like improvising on the keyboard because I just wanted a new layer, some kind of counter melody in this section. So when I was first playing it in, it sounded like this. But like, I wasn't really sold on that, so I thought, I'll try bounce it out, reverse it, and yeah, just got this really subtle texture in the background. The piano comes back in as well, and we get this. So it's a really simple counter melody here, and it's just this kind of like brass synth. I don't know if you can hear, but I was also like pitch bending it a little bit on my keyboard when I was playing it in. And it was just this sound here. It came from Analog Lab, and this is from Key Major in his Analog Tapes bank, and it was just this pattern. So you can hear that subtle pitch bending that I was doing, and because we've stripped away a lot of the glitchy textures, there's just more space now in this section of the verse. And also something you can do to make things like drums or other elements really hit harder, instead of leaving the piano all the way through like this, I've chopped it right here, so when this the kick drum hits, and same with this texture, they just have more impact, so. So yeah, I've got that kind of like drum fill again, and just accented it with the snare that I added. And took a portion of that synth and just a nice little like rhythmic. It's just accenting these tracks together. And then I took a portion of the bass that I'm about to show you now in this next section and just reversed it, put a fade on it. And then I took the bass from the section I'm about to show you and just chopped a portion of it, reversed it, added this fade so it became a riser. And I've got this Portal preset on this 8th note triplet shape pan, and it's just giving it this triplet kind of rise. Dun, 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 dun. So it's following the rhythm of the project, the 6/8 feel, that swing, and usually anything that's in kind of a triplet rhythm, which if you don't know, a triplet is basically going to be like 3 notes where you can essentially count it out as triplet, 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 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's the rhythm we're going for with a lot of these kind of like rhythmic elements and even the bass. And then just this riser, which was actually just like a clap with a bunch of reverb, and I just took a portion of it, did the same thing, reversed it, added that fade, some delay. And so that's how we transition into this next section, the bridge. I love that bass at dun, 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 right at the end there. So yeah, keeping that piano chopped, so it's just this like, you know, back and forth kind of call and response with these textures in the piano. And then we've got the bass here. So the bass was from Analog Lab, and it's this bass live from Manhattan, and I just played this. So you can hear some of the notes are kind of like sliding or gliding into each other. That's just where the notes overlap. And then when they don't overlap, that's when you get that attack, like you hear the beginning of the note. So I actually ducked exactly where the kick from the drums are, just to create space. And I've also side chained it to the drums. So that means that the bass is going to duck when that kick drum hits. So it just sits a bit nicer. Now it's going to be maybe a bit subtle, but if I take it off, the bass just becomes a bit too prominent. So just making it sit a lot nicer by using a multi-band compressor and ducking where the kick drum, that low end, is on the drums, and then just boosting some of the highs. So I find in my projects I almost always add these kinds of like swells just at the end, even if it's just from layers that I've already used, and then just taking a portion and reversing them, putting the fade on, pretty much always works. And I have this one really awesome ambient texture here, which is this. And it just really complemented the other elements. So now moving into the final section, the outro, we just get this. So this is something I like to do when I'm creating outros quite often, and you can try this yourself, just taking a lot of those same layers. You know, I've got the piano, I've got the like weird like harp distorted texture, and even some of the rhythmic components. I basically just bounce them all together into one track, and then I add halftime, I add reverb, you know, it's a full wet mix, and then I EQ out a lot of the highs, a lot of the lows, or at least a lot of the highs, and then we get like something that's just more textured. So it just becomes something that's just further in the distance and just a lot more subdued. And this was a bass that I'd actually started with at the beginning of the project, but it didn't really suit. It's a very low and distorted bass. It's an acoustic bass. The VST is a Modo bass, and it was just this studio bass preset. Yeah, it sounds really low, but I just thought it gave it a lot of like grit and kind of dark body to it. Almost a bit of a like horror kind of sound effect. It's just really low and mean and metallic sounding, and contrasting that with this bass. And I really, really like the tone that I was able to get with that. And that's the exact same bass as before. And that's the exact same bass as this one. And this is what I mean about understanding how to use your plugins and the tools that you have to create new sounds. I mean, it's not completely new, but the tone is completely different. And that just came from really cutting out a lot of the low end, because I have that other bass, which is just like super like taking up the low end. I take out the low end from this, and I also wanted it to sound thin and kind of acousticy, and like someone was there like really playing it. Added some of this RC20 to make it sound a bit more vintage. I also added this plugin just to make it sound really mono, because it was just like all over the stereo field. It was sounding really wide and weird, and just a little bit of reverb with a short delay, so it sounded intimate, close, again almost like someone's just sat there like playing a bass. So yeah, that was the track breakdown, and I really want to emphasize the key takeaway being to experiment with new rhythms and possibly even time signatures. It's really easy to be in the same kind of formulaic boxes that we put ourselves into, composing in 4/4, sticking to a minor key, which I'm guilty of, and there's a lot of variation within those parameters, but as soon as you start to break those boundaries and push yourself out of that comfort zone, you end up creating stuff that's really more unique to yourself and just exploring new territory and new ideas. So maybe if you start a new project, try and compose it in 6/8 or even a different time signature. And then lastly, just taking sounds and processing them in a way that makes them sound really brand new and kind of fresh. You'll really improve your chops as a music producer and just have more skills and tools in your arsenal if you know how to manipulate sounds to make them sound way different. So you'll be less reliant on just using samples from other people. And like I said in the beginning, if you want to work with me one-on-one, then you can book a free call below. We'll work together to improve your music production where you're trying to get to, whether that's making money from your music, creating better compositions, mixing, mastering, any of that we can discuss completely for free down below. And so now if you want to see me break down a much more melodic sample, something a bit more groovy and uplifting, you can watch this video here. This one was a lot of fun to make, so you can check that out. And until then, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.